Yes, good afternoon. This is Jeff and Sophia, and tonight we're going to be really talking about some problematic areas in our curriculum, which is really access and equity in our curriculum. We're going to be looking at it from a couple of different perspectives, but we have both have different expertise in different areas, and we're going to be looking at those, and we're going to be kind of talking through those this afternoon and just kind of giving you a broader perspective of how these two perspectives impact the curriculum, both historically and going into the future. Yeah. What area is your expertise in? What are you going to be discussing this afternoon?
Okay, so right now I am a practicing practitioner in the field of special education and literacy. And so my focus is really on being able to access true, and I guess it's more about the instruction. It's about response to intervention and how we are assessing and instructing our students that are in low income schools. So focusing on how we identify them, how we instruct them, and how we progress monitor them to be able to close the gaps. And what about you, Jeff?
Yeah, look, it's really important because I think, we're working along the same veins. I'm really been involved with a variety of different literacy, in particular, working with students who've fallen behind in their education pursuits. And part of that's been, from an educational perspective, has been the lack of technological access. So, as you probably really are aware, artificial intelligence and AR and VR have become very prevalent in some in some learning environments, but not in others. And from my experience, I see that students are falling behind that don't have access to these technologies. So I want to bring some attention and awareness to that area and make that a little bit more prevalent so that we're more aware of what's going on out there.
Yeah, I definitely can see how those two are related.
So, Sophia, I can, yep.
Okay. I think we have a slight delay in there. So what I was going to say was I can definitely see how our two interests and how our problem of practices are definitely interrelated, because for me, I see that one of the major things in low income schools or Title I schools is the access, right? And so when you look at the curriculum
Mm-hmm.
and when you look at technology and how now in 2023 those go hand in hand. You really should not be talking about access to curriculum and not include technology and this AI scene that is coming fast and furious. And one of the things I know that you've mentioned in the past is that we haven't caught up to what it is, right? Curriculum and education hasn't caught up to how we can use it, how we can access it, and how we can help it to make things more equitable for all students. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We see a lot of different things have changed the way that we view curriculum and our instructional strategies within the classroom, especially in the younger age groups. I mean, I think technology advances moving forward. But that became more prevalent, I believe, in the post-pandemic world that we live in. I believe that we saw a big gap in technologies and at least the use of technologies because some teachers to implement technologies or had access, whereas others didn't. And that created some access issues and some equitable issues in the classroom. And I think, just going back to that, did you by any chance, how does the post-pandemic, I guess, educational landscape, in Title I elementary school, how does that impact the effectiveness of, I guess, response to intervention for literacy compared to, in your view, to the period? I
So
guess particularly concerning economically disadvantaged students.
So from what I see is that pre-pandemic, we were addressing this only from how the students were learning, right? When we were, the problem really was focusing on what the students did not learn and what they needed to be able to learn to catch up to grade level and be proficient. And now we need to really be shifting our focus, not just on that piece, but we need to add the layer of proficient instruction. Because now I feel as though we definitely have a gap in that, because like you said, there was the access, right? And then the pandemic posed a problem where we now have so many teachers that opted into retiring during that time. You have so many people
Right.
that are now teaching that are not even certified teachers. In the state of Louisiana, right now, you don't even need to be certified to be a teacher. You don't need to be certified to be an administrator over a school. So that's major because we're skipping steps, right? And we're in skipping steps, we're causing these gaps to become larger and larger and larger because now we do not have highly qualified teachers in the classroom. I'm not going to say not at all, but we definitely are missing that piece there. So when it comes to those economically disadvantaged campuses and schools and districts, really, now you're looking at where the access is limited. So then you're pulling into how the pandemic has really affected things. So let me go back a little bit. During the pandemic, we saw a surge in different resources being given to schools, right? You had Zoom being given. You had companies like Edpuzzle. You had companies like iReady and Progress Learning. So many different companies were just shoving it to you, right? They were giving it to you for little to nothing. Now that we're on the downside, right? Now those schools that were able to have access to that, they don't have access to it as easily as they did before, which kind of brings me into your subject of expertise. Is what inspired you to focus on the integration of AI, AR, VR technologies in the K-12 education?
Yeah, well, look, I agree with you, Sophia. I agree. In fact, my motivation for focusing on this space, technology is in particular, transformative, abilities of these technologies in the learning environment. I've observed that the disparity between the skills students acquire in traditional education settings, and of course, contrasted that to the evolving demands of the digital age. And this disconnect inspired me to explore how integrating these technologies could address this gap, prepare students with essential digital literacy and critical thinking skills. And my personal experiences observing classrooms without access these particular technologies just highlighted the missed opportunities for interactive and experimental learning. I recognize the absence of technologies hindered the students from engaging with immersive educational content, which obviously limited their exposure the, to real world applications. Not bouncing back to you, but I do think that when you see the challenges that that schools face in implementing RTI and using technologies in the digital literacy space, what do you see, Sophia, which are I guess the critical components and characteristics of an effective, RTI framework for literacy in the Title I elementary schools where you're familiar, and how do you factor, I guess, how do you factor such as teacher training and resource allocation and I guess quality of Tier 1 instruction contribute to the success or the failure of RTI implementation? Especially in the context of addressing literacy disparities post-pandemic.
I think the biggest piece is going back to the framework of which it was built on, right? When you look at the systematic curriculum, you look at all the data that goes into developing that curriculum. And it it should change, right? If we're going off of data, it should change as well. Our approach should change, our instruction should change, and how, the whole piece of it should not be built to where it's literally in a frame. I look, when you think about that word, I feel like now we're treating it like it seriously is a frame, is unmovable, but we're expecting something to change. And post pandemic, we need to adjust that. We need to look at what systematic curriculum looks like right now. And when we think about equity, we think about changing the system. In order to make things more equitable, you need to change the system in which it exists in. And when you're applying that post pandemic, you have to look at all the factors. We cannot just look at the student. We have to be able to look at all the pieces in there. Right now, we are looking at a teacher shortage. So what else are we looking at? We're looking at a shortage in specialists. So you're having it to where you have specialists that are now having to service many campuses, not just one. So now they're not available to pull and have those groups and those models. There's a school out in the Midwest that really had it down packed before the pandemic. And I'm really interested in looking back to see how that school is making it now. They had it to where students would go to different classrooms because their teacher that they went to, or maybe the teacher they had was not a subject matter expert in that content area. So they would end up going to a teacher that might have been the writing guru, right? And so then that person was going to be able to provide them with interventions on a great level of understanding because they were the subject matter expert on that. Now we're dealing with post-pandemic stuff where there's that gap in instruction, not just that gap in learning. So really where the framework was built on and the model that it follows, we need to go back and look at that model. We need to spend more time. You mentioned teacher training and development. We need to spend more time on training teachers on, one, learning how to read the data and respond to the data, and in a sense of the plan, and also in the sense of the in the instruction itself. So that kind of like brings me back to asking you a question about the AI piece, because I really feel like if we had it more equitable and widening it up, that we will be able to really start to see where we can change the system. So my question for you is, you've mentioned the widening of digital divide and its implications for educational equity. Can you elaborate more for us on how the divide is currently manifesting in K-12 and how the integration of these technologies may bridge the gaps?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's such a great question, Sophia. We all know that the omission of these technologies in K-12 curriculum is extremely problematic. It leaves students ill prepared for the demands of the digital age, and limits their exposure to critical skills that are required for the job market. I mean, the digital divide manifests, an extremely unequal access to technology and the resources that are available. And disadvantaged students in particular are the ones that are bearing the grunt of this, and they're already coming from a disadvantage background, and many of these schools or the districts are unable to provide access or they lack the resources to provide the access or at least equal access to these technologies, which results in a terrible inequality where some students have immersive learning opportunities and others don't. And you look through the integration of these technologies in education, it can bridge this gap by democratizing access to immersive learning experiences and giving everyone the same opportunities. And you mentioned how challenging it is for these students to get digital, yeah, I'm sorry, to get literacy skills. Well, this is exasperated when you've got a learning environment that's not as adaptive as others, and it's not personalized, and it's certainly not custom made. And so providing access to these tools, schools can offer equal opportunities for all students to develop, again, the critical skills that are required for the digital age and the job market going forward. And so, Sophia, you probably have to see that, I would have thought, just where you're at, and I guess just where curriculum has failed some of the students that you work with, which, what's your view on, and I guess in what ways do you believe that the implementation of a systematic curriculum would impact the effectiveness of a response to intervention for in Title I elementary schools, both as a solution and as a potential hindrance? And how do educators strike the balance between, I guess, utilizing a structured curriculum on one hand for data-driven decision-making, but at the same time adapting to the unique challenges that each student presents individually, especially, post-pandemic?
I think when we look at the framework, because with RTI, you have tier 1, which is everybody all together. It's the whole group. Then you have tier 2, where we have, oh, well, Johnny is struggling. He's struggling here. We can give him he's not quite just not getting it. He's not terribly below grade level, but he's struggling. And then you have your tier 3, where you have those kiddos that we're going to have to start really being more aggressive. And we need to really look at our data and try to figure out vertically, looking at the vertical alignment and seeing where the deficit started at, and it's going back to the basics, really. It's going back to looking at the system as a whole and how soon are we intervening. So you mentioned something that really triggered something in my head, talking about the problems that is causing in the Title I and those students that are already have some disadvantages, right? The thing is that when you look back at education, what happens when you have 1 year of a bad teacher, poor instruction? It takes double the time to recover from that. Then you put COVID, you put the pandemic in there, and throwing that monkey wrench in there really, really threw some stuff off. Because what if you had a child that is coming from poverty, maybe has a lot of ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences are really high for them. Then the next piece is now we all have ACEs, the same one main thing in common, and that's the trauma that the pandemic caused. So now you have all of those coupled together, and I mentioned me being in special education. What I've seen is that these things together mimic specific learning disabilities. It makes it look like these students have these disabilities that they really probably don't even have. And they don't, and I say that because I've seen where really good hardcore instruction for 9 weeks, right, has taken a kid that was started here and they have grown here. So now we're here after 9 weeks. Another 9 weeks, we're over here. So now we're looking at, now they're on the opposite side. They've done a 180 to where they were before. And so, but the framework hasn't changed, Jeff. Like, it's still the same. And I feel like we need to do things earlier, right? We need to look at pre-K and kindergarten differently. Now, the lens has to be flexible, right? Because we still got to look at the language, right? A lot of those students that early, they're lacking the language. So we cannot assess for everything. But we definitely have to they need to come on our radar, and we need to examine the ACEs and how they contribute to a child's learning. And it's out there readily for us. We talk about it in trainings, we talk about it in professional development, but for some reason, it's not translating into the classroom. And for me, I just really struggle with that. And I really feel like the AI piece, and I'm getting my iPad back open here so I can truly go back to this question that I really wanted to ask you. And I was thinking about how implementing the constructivist and the constructionist learning theories, and how we can use that with your AI, and how we can use that with the, bringing in that systematic and making it make sense. So how do you feel as though those things really come together for you in your world of those technologies?
Yeah, look, Sophia, it's so funny because the objective really for classroom instruction is really to engage children and to develop a learning environment where each individual student can thrive. And you know, these technologies are so good at adapting to the student's learning style, to their pace, tailoring instruction to individual needs, and help them explore complex concepts in an immersive environment. And certainly in a classroom of these technologies align with the constructive approach by really facilitating student-centered learning. For instance, an AI powered adaptive learning platform could personalize content delivery, cater to individual learning needs. And this is something that I feel that has been overlooked by curriculum specialists and existing curriculum. It's something that's just non-existent. It's a one size fits all curriculum, and that doesn't work. And so these technologies create immersive simulations where students get to actively engage in problem solving, enhance their creativity and their critical thinking at their own pace in their own simulation, something that is meaningful, that impacts their individual lives. And with the constructionist framework, these technologies really enable students to design and build digital artifacts. For example, if a student could use an AI-driven programming tool to develop an application, or use AR, VR environments to create virtual models, foster hands-on learning experiences that encourage innovation and collaboration. And let's face it, if you're behind if you're behind from a literacy perspective or a numeracy perspective, often students don't feel like that they want to contribute because they feel like they're being held to a standard in which they may not have the confidence or even the ability to be able to perform at that same standard as someone next to them that may not have their same background. And so it creates that inability to create equity just by the fact that it's absent in the curriculum. And so my view is that the constructive learning theory is certainly part of the answer. It may not be part of the whole answer, but it certainly goes some way in helping reform a curriculum that's void of technologies that no doubt the world is implementing. And in the United States, we are being left behind. And I'll give you some statistics here in a little bit, but it's we are the United States of America, and our students deserve the best education that they can possibly get. And so, from my perspective, I think that it all starts in elementary schools. It all starts with our kids that are in our tier ones, our tier twos, our tier threes. We should even let the guys get to tier three. We can avoid that. In my my view is that we could avoid that if we could. And if we had certain technologies that we implemented at an early age, I think that we could go a long ways in being able to avoid a lot of this. So, I guess going back to what you do and how you go about it, Sophia, what specific strategies and interventions do you think could be employed to address gaps and challenges in your space in response to intervention for, literacy in tier one elementary schools? And, especially since we're post-pandemic, let's face it, we are different post-pandemic than we are pre-pandemic. Things have changed. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, as you were talking, what made me think about things in reading comprehension, and one of the biggest deficits for our students that struggle is that one of the big things is background knowledge, right? Activating prior knowledge. And a lot of our students don't have anything to activate. So using AI and using those creating those artificial environments for those students to be in there, in VR, you're creating the background knowledge for them. You're helping them be able to later on activate something else, right? So that's one of the biggest strategies right there. And I just thought about how we could link both of our problems, right? And be able to answer some of those questions that we both have. And then the modeling and the repetition. As a literacy teacher, and working with students with dyslexia, one of the biggest things that I keep doing is I always model and I always use real life things like PlayStation. And I said, okay, look at the word PlayStation. That is a compound word,
Mhm.
And so then we talk about being able to blend, and we talk about the different spelling ways with the AY, So they want to say pl, y, and so it makes sense because when
Yeah.
you teach them phonetically what those things look like, yes, the Y does make the Y sound. And, but how do we do it when we talk about AY? And so bringing those examples in and helping them make connections with things they see all the time. Walmart, and I teach them the different syllables. Okay, we know that every syllable has one vowel sound, and teaching them the correct rules. So you're looking at the science of reading and the science of teaching, right? So those strategies have to come from the science. So when you look at systematic curriculum and you look at how it's driven, you have to look at the science of it. Yes, the art
Mhm.
of teaching is very valid. Absolutely. You shouldn't replace it. You shouldn't replace, art with science. You have to marry them together and have
Yeah,
that balance. So in
that's right.
any strategy that you use or any strategy
Yeah.
that you employ in your classroom, you have to have the balance. And people get caught up in these reading wars. Oh, well, the balance of literacy is not right. And oh, the science of teaching. Da, da, da. I'm like, look, first of all, let's do what's right by kids. Let's look at what that child needs. Let's look at what the data says
Yeah.
your classroom needs right now, because there's been years that I've been able to really grow kids with the balance and looking at reading because they were strong readers. I didn't have to rely so much on the science because they were strong readers. However, they were strong readers where they could read the word, but they
Mhm.
were not strong readers in the comprehension. So
Right.
they already learned to read, but now they have to read to learn. And so now you have to be able to look at your model differently. You cannot, and that's why I go back to the framework needs to be more fluid. It
Yeah.
needs to be more flexible. You need to have more autonomy on how you are addressing these needs, these critical needs for these students. The strategies also have to include writing. You have to. In my resource classrooms, Jeff, what I'll do is that first I'm going to create some background knowledge, right? And then I'm going to have them write about it. We either watch CNN 10, or we're going to read Times for Kids magazines, or we're going to just pull old fashioned newspapers out and we're going to look at what it says and we're going to talk about it, and then you're going to write about it. So you're going to think for 3 minutes, you're going to write for 2 minutes, and we're going to turn and talk for a minute about what we read and what we wrote. And
Yeah.
then we're going to take it a next step further. Then I'll be able to see where are the deficits. Is it in language? Is it in comprehension? Is
Mhm.
it in reading? So, because when we talk about language, we can't be remiss and leave out the EB, the emergent, bilingual students, right? Because a lot of our Title I schools now
Mhm.
include a large majority of English language learners. And
Yeah.
so that really just goes back to some of the things that you've touched upon with the AI and with the digital technologies of things. Because when you talk about, I'm just kind of go back and back up here. When you talk about advocating for the policy changes and addressing the digital divide, what are the specific policy changes that you would propose and that you would advocate for in order for us to address that with schools and districts?
Well, policy changes are one of those things that are very slow to come to fruition. Advocating obviously for policy changes involves lobbying for increased funding and resources, dedicated to providing equitable access to technologies in schools. At the moment, that just doesn't happen. There's an absence of funding models that are specific to technologies and specific to low income or disadvantaged schools. And so additionally, I suggest that, I would advocate for initiatives that support teacher training programs. So it's one thing if you have the technologies, it's another if a teacher knows how to use those technologies to implement a curriculum that that benefits the student. And that generates a positive learning outcome into a curriculum that that is void of opportunities to do that. And so a teacher has to learn how to do that. So both in teacher education, but also in professional development programs. So to address the digital divides, I think schools and districts need to implement strategies, like let's subsidize or loan devices to students that are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Let's make it accessible. If you're going to move down an AR or VR, headsets are no big deal. Headsets, the Google headsets run about $25. If you bought 50 of them and a laptop, you'd be out $1,000 or $1,200 or something. So, partnerships with technological companies and community initiatives, can provide access to, I guess, these necessary pieces of hardware and software, which are not that expensive to buy. You don't need the top end for a classroom. You just need the hardware and the software to get started. And in my view, all students would benefit, from these advancements. And look, I fall within this, progressive, learning sort of, I'm a progressive, tradition sort of guy. I believe that, this tradition, all curriculum changes need to be wrapped around societal changes. And as well as I do, society's at a rapid pace, and the curriculum is still baked in 1970 model, curriculum thought. And so we need to update that and to integrate new knowledge and utilize innovative methods so that we can enhance student learning. And, it all starts back in the elementary programs. And I know that the digital divide is very relevant, but, I think it also manifests itself when you start in the elementary environment where you've got responses to interventions that could be used if you had technologies to be able to help you do it. Yeah. But if you don't, it just makes it old school, and you go back to, years to outdated, curriculum thought, and you're implementing and you're working twice as hard, whereas the guys down the road have those technologies. They're not going backwards. They're going at a speed like going forward. And all of a sudden now the gap gets much larger between two schools that might be, 5 minutes apart. Right. Just one faces one neighborhood and one faces the other. And yet, their financial models are very different, and therefore their learning experiences are very different. So, I guess, how would you propose like action steps? I mean, to enhance a response to intervention, in Title I elementary schools, how would you propose action steps to do that that align with evidence-based practices and that contribute to fostering, I guess, more responsive and effective educational framework? And what measures could you take to ensure that, you know, a successful implementation and evaluation of those action steps, you know, to help, I guess, mitigate some literacy disparities and especially in those disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged students?
I think the first step is going to be reforming our committees or our teams, right? You need to have equal representation from all pieces. We need to look back and see what does our MTSS team look like? What does our multi-tier support system look like now? We need to have somebody that is our ESL representative. We need to have a special ed representative. We need to have a gen ed representative from different content areas. You need to have your administrators as well, because they're going to know about the budget, you know, they're going to have that piece. And everybody needs to be in the know about what that looks like and how we're allocating the funds. Because what has happened is that as schools, we're losing, the attendance is getting bad. All right. Public schools are losing students to charter schools. And what is happening here in the DFW area specifically is that the charter schools are growing in population, but they're not necessarily growing in growth, you know, because teachers traditionally in those classrooms have a smaller class size. So now you teach differently when you have that, because when you have a smaller group of kids, you can get to everybody and have a more effective system. So now when we look back on the public school side, where we have to start taking action steps first, like I said, was looking at how we structure our teams. Then we got to look back at how we're educating our teams. How are we continuing that? What type of professional developments are we doing, and what follow-ups are we doing? We have this big initiative in Texas where you have reading academies. Okay, great. The reading academy is out there. What's next? So many parts of the programs, because people are pushing a brand, did not align with what the students needed. And there was missing pieces. Why? Because the districts were not purchasing the whole product because they could not afford it. And when you have enrollment drop, that means the less money comes to the school. That means less money comes to the district. So, you know, and then you talk about the policies. We need to change how much a school gets per child. I think, and it's changed. I believe it was like $960 per student per day, something around there that you get for a child. So when they leave and they're not there for attendance and they miss 10 days, multiply that. That's a lot of money, you know? And so when you sit there and when you want to go back and look at action steps, first we need to look at how the money is being allocated. Once the money is being allocated, we need to now address the teams that we're building. Then once you address the teams that you've built, how are you holding those teams accountable with teacher learning and teacher education and teacher instruction? Because like I said in the beginning, yes, RTI was focusing on the learning gaps. But now we need to, before we can even structure it again, we need to look at the teaching instruction gaps that we have. We need to really start to hone in and restructure that framework, because it was built back in the gap. When you look at data, most of the data that I have found was from years ago, the 70s, the 60s. And then you can come up to 2002 with No Child Left Behind. And then you talk about what that looks like and what Bush was trying to put into place. And then you sit back and now you're looking back at all the kids that were left behind. And it's really no pun on him. You know, he really was trying to do something. You know, I really applaud his efforts in trying to do something to hold things accountable, but we can't keep holding on to something that is so outdated. We have to catch up and we have to bring it together. So which brings me to really my last and final question for you about the progressiveness, right? The progressive transition emphasizes the importance of continuous evolution, right? And how we adapt based on feedback. So how do you envision the feedback process working in the context of integrating new technologies into curriculum, and what metrics do you see what metrics do you use to evaluate success?
That's a great question, Sophia. I think feedback is everything. We don't get enough feedback. We get enough arbitrary feedback that is tick the box exercise in a lot of circumstances. And the feedback that we do get is often negative feedback. One of the things that I believe, integrating feedback in the feedback process of integrating new technologies in the curriculum involves collecting a lot of insight from students, from teachers, from parents, and from all the other stakeholders. And that means our community members, our technology companies. It means the job market, companies in the market, and what they're going to be looking for, just to get an understanding of what are the requirements. And then I would say that, using surveys, we use a survey once a year or something to get a little bit of feedback here and there. And we put it into these little charts, and then we throw it out. Everybody looks at it for 5 minutes. We have a meeting Friday. We talk about it, put it aside. We don't look at it again until next year.
Wow.
We need to have regular surveys. We need to have regular focus groups. We need to have an assessment data which helps evaluate the effectiveness of technology integration. So we need to have pilot projects. We need to, go into tier 1 schools, and we need to make sure that we've got pilot programs on the ground, they're effective, and that we are actually measuring that effectiveness of the technology in that integration. So we should use matrices like student engagement levels, attendance, academic performance, and the development of critical and problem-solving skills. Let's put kids out on the street today that think critically and can solve their own problems. And part of that process is just going to be, continuous adjustments and, based on feedback to ensure that our integration remains relevant and beneficial to the learning experiences of each student. So if we are integrating a specific technology in one area and we find that in history it's working, but in science it isn't, let's evaluate that. Let's make changes and not make it this whole school approach, because we've got adaptive learning strategies in place where we can personalize and we can custom make our learning experiences for each individual student. And so for me, I think that would go a long ways, Sophia, in helping solve some of the problems both you and I have seen in the classroom. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree, especially when I think back to the question you asked about the evidence-based stuff. And those surveys will go a long way. We have to sit back and we have to have more than one way to collect our data. We have to have more than one way to analyze our data. And
Correct.
with those AI tools now, we kind of got it easier than we used to. Before we had to have these big, long spreadsheets, right? And we had to go through and delve in, but now we can kind of just put the information in. It is going to spit out some stuff for us. And so, but again, it has to be fair, it has to be equitable, and we have to go back to the basics, and I shouldn't use and we have to adjust accordingly. You mentioned talking about if it worked in social studies but didn't work in science. There's no need to change the whole thing. Let's just focus on what needs to be working in science. Let's adjust that. I think a lot of times people look at stuff and they make these adjustments on curriculum based on one thing that's happened, one thing that's went wrong. And now they're trying to say, now everybody can do it. Everybody should do it. Or, oh, well, they had huge success in New York. They had huge success in Connecticut. But what about Mississippi? And, and speaking about Mississippi, they are leading us now where they were before lower, before they were behind. And now, because they started implementing different law and different things on teacher training and on accessibility and things like that, now they are leading us in this literacy hunt and fight. There's a program, a documentary called The Right to Read. And it really opened my eyes up to it, because it said, and it highlighted the fact that during this time frame, now which Right to Read came out, I think early this year, last year, fourth graders, Black students that are in fourth grade, 8 out of 10 are not proficient readers. Then you look at fourth graders as a whole. 67% of fourth graders as a whole are not proficient readers. What are we doing? What are we not doing? Rather than not what are we doing? What are we not doing? And why are we not catching up with the rest of the world? Why are we not, why are we sitting back here chilling thinking that we're going to have time, and we don't have time because, you're going to blink, and these kids that are not proficient are going to be leading us. And, and their children are going to be further and further behind. And I say that, but then I also say that I think that my son, who's 14 right now, they're going to be the generation that's probably going to be able to start to fix some things, because they are the last age group that had the basics and a good foundation, but they're also the age group that now has that integration where they're going to be able to see it. Whereas my generation had go outside and play. We had cassette tapes, but we also had CDs. We also had MP3s. So whereas my generation was able to come in and make that shift as well, we're responsible for the AI push, but we're also the generation where we relied too much on technology, where our children are now too much reliant on it, and they don't have the brain capacity to learn things in a different critical way and manipulate their thoughts the way they need to, because they're ready like this. They want it right now. That microwave generation, like if it doesn't happen right now, it's not good for them, right? So, man, this was a great
Sophia. Oh, look, I'll tell you what, look, you've just nailed it. In fact, you're talking about some of the investments and getting left behind. Just a couple of stats for you here. The global market value of AR, VR, and education in 2023 was around 55.84 billion US dollars. It was a 32% growth from 2022. The US market is 14 billion of that, whereas China and India are a combined 32 billion. Just to give you an understanding of immersive learning opportunities and where it's coming from, and the investment that we've created here in the US. And alarmingly, which is a good thing, 85% of schools say, public school teachers report that they see great value in using technological platforms in school, but only 17% of schools say they have the technologies. 70% of all teachers that were researched state that the use of AR, VR technologies would help engage and enrich learning in the K-12 classroom. 64% of parents recognize the potential of AR, VR to enhance their child's learning experiences. And get this, 85% of students noted that with enthusiasm and eagerness that they would engage with AR, VR learning experiences if they had the opportunity to do so.
85%.
85%. Oh. Now, you talked about attendance, you talked about engagement, but one of the things that I would hope that listeners to this podcast would do is go back, look at what the world is doing with the investment that they're making in these technologies, and indeed in access to education for all students, so that we create equity. Find out what the globe is doing. Make sure that we are out there providing the most up-to-date and advanced learning experiences that we can give to our students, and make policy changes to the curriculum that give every stakeholder the possibility of getting the best that they can out of the limited education that we're able to give our children in today's school environment.
Yeah, that really just sealed it all. And those numbers, man, the amount of money being spent in other places compared to what's being done here. And the survey of the 85% is what got me. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think that was the biggest number that you said that really stuck with me, because when I sit back and I think about the attendance, when I think about engagement, and I think about the piece and how we can use that to be able to foster things better than what we are, that's huge. And especially when it comes to literacy, because you can literally use AI to differentiate, right? Then you can use AI to be able to modify. So you have the accommodation level, the modification level, and then you have the next level of things to where now we're able to better scaffold, in the classroom and out, because look at the access that students would have if we change things. Well, Jeff, I really truly enjoyed this conversation with you this evening. And I know that we're going to talk more about this, because between your problem of practice and my problem of practice, bringing those together, we can really make some changes and set the example on how to start with the policy. And and that slow moving, we might be able to make it a little quicker now that everybody is like on it, right? Everybody's talking about it, and it's the new buzzword. And now is the time, while the momentum is high, to make those changes. So again, I don't know if you have any last words. We can go ahead and wrap up this conversation for this evening and kind of just sign off.
Yeah, it's been an absolute blast, Sophia. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed learning more about what you do, and just sharing with the general public about how we can help overcome the gaps and the disadvantage for our children, especially in the elementary school system.
Absolutely.